A few years back, when I was in America, I had the chance to work for Mike Tobias for a little while, and one of the things that really impressed me about his basses was just how comfortable the necks were to play, especially the 5 and 6 string basses. And I think much of this comes down to the way he shapes the back of the neck. They're actually asymmetrical. They're slightly slimmer on the treble side, so I've decided to reprofile the neck of Project Berocca. Here I'm preparing my favourite woodworking tool, my cabinet scraper, because that's what I'll use to remove the majority of material. I'm also planning to refinish the neck, and the scraper will make short work of removing the remaining finish. To pull the burr and then turn that back as a hook, traditionally you use a burnishing rod, but these little wooden tools are great, especially because, as you can see, you can use them one-handed. Now, removing material from the back of a neck will weaken it ever so slightly, so if your neck is already quite slim, or if your truss rod is kind of maxed out, then obviously this mod is probably not for you. But luckily this truss rod works just fine, and Project Berocca's neck actually feels kind of chunky. But before I move on to the neck profile, I want to tweak the headstock a little. I've never been too keen on this kind of rounded beak shape that it's got. I'm sure we've all seen photos of this type of mod done badly, and I don't have a lot of timber to play with here, so I'm limited to fairly subtle changes, but I want to pull the two curves around to meet at a slight point. Stingray, Sadowski, the Yamaha BBs, they've all used this design language in their headstocks, and well, I think it looks pretty clean. Whether you're looking at a piece of furniture, or a car, or a guitar, your eyes tend to follow lines, and where they meet in edges or points, you get a kind of design tension. It's a bit like cadences or drum fills, I guess, in music. With this mod, what I'm really doing is changing the shape from one continuous curve to two that punctuate the headstock shape where they intersect. I'm also slimming the lower side a bit by straightening that lower line, just to try and reduce the stubby look of the 3 and 2 headstock. I know it seems a bit pedantic, but subtle changes like this can make a surprising difference to the balance of a shape. Top tip: when you're shaping timber by hand with sandpaper, in this case 120 grit, where possible, always use a block. You'll never get crisp clean lines and edges with just your fingers behind the paper. It seems counterintuitive, but once the shape is there, this backwards arching sanding motion is actually the best way to smooth an outward curve like this. It works really, really well. In fact, you'll often see metalworkers use their files in the same way. Whoops, just nicked that lower edge there. Should have been sawing in the other direction really, but I was a bit too lazy to move the camera and all the lights around. Luckily, I've decided to tighten that lower curve a little anyway, which you'll see in a sec, just to stretch the shape a little more and also sharpen that point a bit. Again, it's the subtle changes that really make the difference here. Another random round object from the workshop. Flexible rulers are handy for this stuff as well. So onto the profile, and the idea here is to take the central part of the neck and kind of tilt it over to make it more accommodating for the shape of your thumb. Once it's all blended in, yeah, the treble side of the neck is a little slimmer than the base side, but really it's the tweaks to the middle of the neck profile that you'll really notice. So with that in mind, I'll start by thinning the neck by 0.5 millimeter at the 1st fret and tapering that down to a full millimeter at the 13th fret. I'm aiming for a nice, even, flat surface that, for the moment at least, is symmetrical about the center line that I just drew. In this shot, as you can see, I did dig out my spoke shave, but I ended up not using it. I'm not removing tons of material here, but if you do have one and you prefer it to a card scraper, then go for it. If you set it up right, it'll be fine for this type of thing. Having said that, depending on the grain run out, you might be limited to just shaving in one direction. In fact, one of the nice things about a cabinet scraper is that even if the piece is figured or has some grain run out, it will still usually work and work in both directions. I think there's some footage of that later on. The pencil line is handy here because with a few scrubs of the sanding block, you can see any high spots. Once I'm happy my strip is nice and flat and even, I'll remark the edge on the bass side and widen the line on the treble side. Then I'll flatten the area between these two new lines, and that'll be the start of my tilted over profile. Again, I'll check for high spots and then mark two more lines, create another flat, then repeat for a third or even fourth time. When you're creating what is kind of a large compound fillet like this by hand, making a series of good straight chamfers first is really the best way. Then it's just a matter of knocking the tops off the ridges and blending it all together. All of this really just takes a bit of practice and checking by feel from time to time. You can get scrapers with concave edges, but I'm just used to this one, I guess. Now I'll remove the excess finish on the back of the neck, then sand with 120 grit. Here I've got the headstock cradle from my setup bench clamped there as a work stop. This is so I can hold the paper in two hands and wrap the neck with it. This is important here. Whether you're reprofiling a neck or just stripping the finish, at this stage you don't want to just rub the neck with the paper in your fingers, because 120 grit will remove too much material and kind of undermine that carefully tapered shape. So now it's on to removing the rest of the finish, and as I mentioned, with the thin clear lacquer on necks like this, the cabinet scraper makes pretty short work of it. Another nice thing about using a scraper like this is that it has 4 long cutting edges. When it starts to feel dull, you just flip it or you move towards the sides like I have here. And by the way, it really only needs the whetstone occasionally. If all 4 edges are dull, you can usually just reburnish them very quickly and you're back to work. A plane, of course, needs to be disassembled and then refettled after you've sharpened it. So I'll sand the whole neck with 120 grit, but that's where I'll leave it for the moment, because I've had this cool idea about trying a particular artistic treatment on this neck that I've never really seen done on a guitar before. I'm not really sure it'll work out, but hey, that's what project bases are for, right? So if that sounds like something you're interested in, hit the subscribe button. And if you've enjoyed this episode, give me a thumbs up. I really appreciate it. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.